Hello, everybody. I was going to say good morning, but it's morning here in BC, but we're all across Canada here today. Such a joy to be meeting with you all. I really look forward to what God is going to do in each one of our lives. We've got about 35 people registered for today, so 10 or so more people might be popping in here. So grateful that you've chosen to spend this next 90 minutes here together. I really hope that you can just settle in and get what God has for you out of this time here as we gather as leaders today. We want you to be able to be as open and honest and process what you need to here together today on the call. Lots of prayer has gone into today. It's been a hard season, hasn't it? Today, we are hoping that we can all just process this last season together. We're trusting that the Spirit is going to be here with us. And I just want to open us up quickly in prayer before I pass it off to our awesome facilitators here today. So would you join me in talking to our God? Jesus, I'm so grateful that you are such a good God, that you are for us and you are not against us, that you walk with us every step of the way. You are our ever-present help in times of trouble. I thank you that you relate with every single hardship we are going to go through and that we have gone through. And we just welcome you here on this call as the loudest voice that we're going to hear today. God, we know that your Spirit can speak to each one of us right where we're at, the exact thing that we need to hear. And so we invite you to do that through all of our conversation here today, God. We trust you. We declare that we trust you to speak into our need. And we invite you to be a shield around us and block out all distraction. Help us to take a deep breath and settle in and expect you to move here today. Help us to have courage to be honest with ourselves for our good and for your glory, Jesus. We welcome you. Amen. So welcome to Regroup. We are here to declutter our mind, gain perspective, and bounce ideas off of other leaders. We're not in this alone, so we're hoping we find fellowship in it all here today. Our facilitators today are both found on our Enrich Resource Center at EMCC enrich.ca. And they're both therapists who have been helping a lot of leaders just like us through this really trying couple of years. So they're bringing all kinds of learning from those times here together. It's going to be really practical, really real, and I'm really grateful for them sharing their time here with us today and their expertise. So I'm going to pass it off to Phil Kaitler. He's from Ontario, and Dianne Kuglin, who is from Alberta, and they are going to just quickly introduce themselves a little bit, and we're going to dive right into Regroup here today. So thank you, Phil and Dianne, for being here. You can go ahead and unmute and take it over.
Dianne, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. So I'm Dianne Kuglin. I own Standing Stones Counseling in Innisfail, and I've been with the EMCC, started at Hillcrest in 2005, and while I'm not working in the church, I do get to work with a lot of Christians and a lot of pastors and leaders from the churches. And so it's a privilege to be here. And I know that the people that are coming through my doors are very stressed and lots of anxiety and different things. So I'm looking forward to just being real here with all of you today.
And my name is Phil Kaitler. I'm a registered psychotherapist. I've been I guess, a therapist in many different sort of facets and ways over the last 30 years. Was a pastor for a while at a church running their Celebrate Recovery program. And I don't know how much I can encourage you how amazing Celebrate Recovery is. It literally changed my life. Just to give you a bit of a snippet, maybe to give you a bit of an idea. As a therapist, I'm taught to be in the moment with individuals, and nobody really cares how you feel, right? I mean, that's what you're taught right from the beginning. People pay for your time, so that's what you give them. To be safe and Celebrate Recovery, you actually have to tell your story. And for me, that was a huge shift, because now it's about relating to others, from that same sort of place. And it taught me a tremendous amount. It actually was a huge healing component in my life. So I don't want to go too much about Celebrate Recovery, but I finished up doing that a few years back, and now I'm in private practice full time, working quite a bit with larger corporations, individuals doing some coaching, doing quite a bit of corporate training, as well as seeing individuals for therapy. And very grateful for mediums like Zoom, where it allows us to connect with others in ways I never ever trained to connect with others. And so I'm really glad that we can perhaps even just start a bit of a conversation today. I've worked with groups out of the UK, the US, as well as Canada, as they've been transitioning now throughout the pandemic. And now, even as we are looking at some people returning back to the workplace, and maybe you've heard that within your own congregation, some groups have been incredibly accommodating and others have been almost very unempathetic in how they want to go about doing some of that. And there's been a lot of turmoil through the pandemic. I literally have seen it tear families apart, and we've been in therapy as groups have just polarized and really, well, you probably know, as some of you will share with each other, even in terms of your churches, and how this isn't a theological issue, but it is an issue that seems to be very polarizing in a lot of settings. And we know that there's family trees that have been literally changed through this pandemic, and how that has certainly changed things in people's lives. Yet, I've seen some people become incredibly resilient, do things they would have never done before, learn technology that they never would have perhaps even got involved in, maybe have resilience and patience in places where at one time they were not maybe renowned to have those qualities. And so we know that it has been a very trying time for many people. I hear people talk, and often I think of the word worn. You know, people are just a bit worn right now. They're just a bit tired. They're losing maybe some of that patience or some of that resilience. And so I'm hoping that as we talk about this in a bigger picture, and then even as you as leaders, as caregivers, as spiritual leaders in individuals' lives, that you're able to take some of this and perhaps use it for others. I'm a big believer. I don't know how you feel, but I know when I would preach more often, I was a big believer that I have to ingest it before I give it to others. I have to put it somewhere deep inside of me and kind of work it through, which often led me to have to do amends with people and do different things before I got in front of other people, because I thought I better live this out before I ask other people to do the very same thing. And I hope that is true for you as well, that you can sort of ingest some of this and then maybe model that to some of the people around you. The pandemic's been hard. It's been hard on all of us, and some people have learned some of those new skills and trades that we are talking about. But one of the key things that will be key for all of us, for people within your congregation, and even for yourself, is to become maybe perhaps a bit more self-aware during this time. And self-aware is really just being in the moment and allowing yourself to feel what you feel. Now, I know some of you come from different backgrounds than I do. I was raised kind of in an interesting environment, but I know culturally, we weren't really big on being self-aware and being in the moment. We actually, and this is more my background, not yours, we really weren't big on feeling our feelings, to be honest. We think our feelings and we do our feelings, but we don't feel our feelings. I think in some ways, that's why I became a therapist. I went to school and it was like, you're allowed to feel your feelings. I mean, if I was really honest about my family, we eat our feelings. That's what we do. So when things are good, we eat, and when things are bad, we just eat. I mean, that's just kind of the way that we work through it. And the reality is, being self-aware is just allowing yourself to feel your feelings in the moment. And here's the interesting thing: many people, and maybe you meet people like this, perhaps this is true in your own life. Many people, when they come to that sort of being in the moment with themselves and just feeling in the moment, there's a lot of guilt and shame that is attached to that. And we use that as a way of motivating people. I mean, that's certainly part of my cultural background. We make you feel like a tub of goo, and that way I can kind of get you to do the things I really want you to do. And what I'm really looking for here is not that we judge any of those feelings as right or wrong, but that we're just allowed to feel what we are feeling, and maybe just even become aware of that. You know, the pandemic that we are in, for some people, is considered to be a critical incident, where there was a time in our life where we felt threatened for ourselves or for others to lose their life. And with the restrictions that are in place, some of the ways that people are responding are very common for people who are in crises and working through crises in their life. And so as we manage, as we work this through with each other, maybe that will give us a little bit of grace to understand, why do some people maybe act or overreact in ways that they do. For some people, the pandemic will be life-changing. They will look back on this as a life-changing event. Now, for some, that'll be a good thing. They started to perhaps do things in different ways. Sometimes I have to remind parents that although this has been very difficult on their children and they've had to do things in ways that maybe they never sort of imagined they would. One of the neat things is that they've also learned to be resilient. They're going to bring a resiliency into the workplace, perhaps even into relationships that the generation before perhaps didn't have to. And so there's some neat things that will be learned from that. They'll walk into certain situations, they'll say, well, this is nothing like learning from home. Like I'll be able to tackle this, where the generation before might say, I'm backing away, I have anxiety, I have fear, I don't want to, deal with this. So there's an interesting, like we learn relatively little through our success. We learn way more through our calamity or apparent failure. And I do think that even in the season that we're in, that there is some real silver lining that will come from this. Some of the early data that we're seeing within organizations. So this isn't church information. This is now just sort of general information that I'm pulling from. Some of the early data is North Americans can work from home and be successful. We were one of the last sort of continents that actually allowed teleworking and allowing individuals to sort of have more of that hybrid model. Now, some of you as pastors maybe have been doing this for quite some time. But we found out that people can be successful in doing that, but we're starting to see some very specific outcomes from that. One of which is we're finding that people are working more hours than they did before. So they're working longer hours. And starting isn't the issue. It's they're not stopping. They're not finishing. They're not, there's no bookend to that. We're finding that people are grazing their hours. We're not getting as many peak hours from them as well. And so that's becoming a bit of a problem, that things are taking us longer. We have found that people who are back in the office do menial tasks better back in the office. When they're doing it from home, they're just never getting to them. And that is a bit of a problem, or a bit of a pickle or a conundrum that we're seeing. But we're also finding that sometimes people are not socially connecting as well as they, this idea of physical distancing, I think is great. This idea of social distancing, I think is a good idea at all. I think we're a species that really does need others in our life. And so we are looking for that. And so some of the early data is saying that we can adjust fairly well, but we're maybe not adjusting as well as we would like. And so because of that, it does make it, your calling as a pastor is unique. It is very unique, but leading others and trying to maneuver and lead others through the pandemic is not something that is unique for many other people around you. And so I'm hoping that you'll become maybe curious or a bit interested as you perhaps listen to yourself and listen to others. And one thing that I'm finding, just for leaders in general, perhaps it's true for you as well, that it's important for us, and maybe at times, just to stop. Like literally just stop. Like maybe right now, instead of all the multitasking that you're doing in your head, or perhaps even the things that are right in front of you, just to take a moment and stop where you are and think, what is going on inside of me? What's not just going on in my head, but what's going on in my heart? How am I feeling? And maybe just taking that moment and being in the moment is a great way for us to maybe assess what our next step is that perhaps we need to take. When we start to feel our feelings and we allow ourselves just to sit there, whether they're perhaps good or not. I know I was sort of joking with someone more recently. I have told off more people and written more sermons in the shower than anywhere else in my life. And when someone interrupts me in the shower, it's like, no, this is my private time. Like, this is the only time I get with just me with me, without all the noise and expectations. Like, are you kidding me? And it'll be something like, oh, someone's on the phone. I'm thinking, I'm not going to take my phone in the shower. Like they can wait, and this is sort of my time. And I think for many of us, we just starve for that time where we can just sort of take and slow down and truly listen and not judge where we should be or shouldn't be, and just feel. I read a quote yesterday as I was doing some of my work, and it went like this. It's not an exact quote, but it went like this. It's not the water around the ship that sinks it, but the water that is in the ship. And sometimes we need to just start to think, what kind of water am I carrying? Am I taking on water? And what does that look like in my life? We know that during this season, and perhaps you've noticed this even within your own congregation, it's been very tough for people to get to the resources that they do need. It's hard for them to get the services and the resources that they are looking for. I had a pastor call me out Vancouver way, And we've met through a bunch of different channels. And he has a person in his congregation right now who is bipolar. And if you've ever had someone who's truly bipolar in your life, you'll realize that when they're in their manic states, it's tough. It's a hard go. And with her, when she's manic high, she doesn't want to take her meds. Of course not. Do you imagine how high is? Like, you would never get another high like this. Like, she literally can do coursework in 1 week. She can read books in literally hours. Like, she is just amazing. But when she hits her low, every mountaintop has the biggest valley beside it. And when we hit those lows, it's quite incredibly low. And so we're just talking about how to maneuver and walk through that season with that person in their congregation. I don't know if you knew this. 1 in 5 Canadians have a mental health issue. I don't know if you knew that. 20%. So 1 in 5 have an active mental health issue or a substance use issue in their life. So when you start to think of your congregation, when you think of your board, when you think of your home, when you start to think of the people that are around you, it means that, first of all, there's a lot of people who are working through stuff and that are having a hard time finding the resources that perhaps they do need. And perhaps it's more prevalent than you realize. If you have a lot of strong opinions about mental health, you're probably going to offend someone, because there's probably someone right around you who actually has a mental health issue that's doing quite well, and it's none of your business. And they have good resources in place, and they're taking care of it in a healthy way. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes when we do meet someone who is working through some stuff, we tend to sort of go to this advice giving, and that maybe they just need to exercise some personal coping strategies and those things that can be helpful. But we shouldn't forget that they're exactly doing that. They're trying to use their personal coping strategies, and they're not working. Within our Celebrate Recovery program, we had some people that went into another program that was a spiritual program where they had sort of changed things around. They came back and they said, Phil, you never send another person to that program. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, I went there and then they started casting out the demons of depression that were in me. And then I kind of thought that there was all this. And he said, I'm just all confused now and stuff. And I said, oh boy, yeah, that's not where we're trying to go with Celebrate Recovery. That's not where we're trying to deal with some of this stuff. We're not trying to eliminate some of these things in your life. We're supposed to have resources that come alongside you as we work through that. And I was kind of sorry that they had sort of been impacted by that. And if it's 20%, I want you to understand there's kind of an important stat that goes with this. It's 43, I think it's 43.6% of Canadians that do have a mental health concern actually get the help they need. So out of the 20% that do have mental health concerns, we have 44% that are actually getting the support. And why do you think that is? And I think it has a lot to do with, well, maybe they don't know, maybe it's self-stigma. I just need to pull up my bootstraps. I just need to do it on my own. They need to figure it out. Maybe it is stigma, that holds them back because they think it'll hold them back from other things. But we do want to certainly keep that in mind, when we are working with others in our life. And so when we do look at these things and perhaps look at where we're at, I just want you to become perhaps a little more self-aware and be able to perhaps look at, where am I in this moment? And perhaps where are some of the other people around me? And what is the water perhaps that I am taking on in my ship? Now, Dianne, can I pass it over to you?
Yeah, I just, when I'm listening to you, Phil, and I mean, we've talked through this together already beforehand, but I really want to encourage everybody on the call to really think about their own mental health. So we're so busy thinking about everybody else's mental health that we sometimes forget that we are human too, and that leaders, they put this burden on themselves to be all to everybody, and you don't realize the toll it takes. So when Phil was saying that the day doesn't kind of end, there's been no end to the day during this pandemic, I think that's so important to say, what am I doing for myself? What breaks am I taking? Who am I talking with? Who am I praying with? Who am I accountable for and to with your own mental health? And so we're going to go into breakout rooms, and there's some questions that we've got for you. And they're going to be in the chat. I'm going to say them, but then they're going to be in the chat room for you. I want you to first be able to introduce yourself, just share where you're from and kind of where you're at. And then we've got choose 3 words you would use to describe yourself in this season. So this whole day is about you. It's not about your congregation. It's about you. You as a leader, you as a person, you just as a human being, not a human doing, which is kind of where I found myself so often. So I really want to encourage that. So then maybe highs and lows as a leader in this season. And then have you learned anything new about yourself in these trying times, good or bad? And please, please don't think that you need to answer all 3 questions. Maybe there's one question that you just say, you know what, this I'd like to talk about a little bit. So when they put you in the breakout rooms, you're going to have these in front of you in the chat, and then take a little bit of time, get to know each other, and we'll see you back here after the breakout.
Well, thank you. And so if we talk a little bit about being self-aware, which hopefully that first part was, now let's talk about maybe self-care and where that perhaps fits into your life. And the interesting thing is, for many of us who care for others, who spend time and genuinely do that, often many of us, that is part of our, feeling that's part of our gift mix as we invest in others. The reality is often the first thing that comes off the plate when we get a little bit tight for time or is our own self-care. We start taking off the things that really actually fill us up and really do make us and continues to keep us healthy. I know through the pandemic, working with many leaders in many different sectors, one of the things we often encourage them is to look at what were you doing prior to the pandemic that was working for you that has changed? What are some of the new habits? What's sort of been put in place, and we've adapted in maybe some good ways. Perhaps we've lost some of the components that maybe aren't so great. Like, for instance, I don't know if you know this, but with as much time that people have been spending on staring at cameras and not necessarily having face-to-face conversations, we've lost a little bit of our social skills. Just the meta messaging, like just understanding and seeing. Have you seen 2 people greet each other and they're kind of like, hey, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do in this moment. Like, can I touch you or not? Or do we shake hands, or do we do toes or elbows, or like, how does this work? Like, and when did we sort of lose our ability to even just sort of connect with each others? And so there's going to be a bit of a transition, as we continue to sort of perhaps meet and continue to meet with each other in significant ways. And when it comes to self-care, I really believe that this is one of the areas that we need to model for others, for other people to really know and see this. I hear people, they say, oh, well, I think it's really important for you to take your breaks. But we don't ever take our breaks, right? I really think it's really important for you, it's kind of like, well, do what I say, but not what I do, and when we're getting some of that feedback, perhaps from others that are telling us, perhaps this would be better for people to experience this with us. It doesn't mean they have to like it. That's not what I'm saying, but they would sort of witness this and see that this is part of our normal. This is part of our culture. It becomes key. Now, I have to help you understand that for some people, they were taught self-care is being selfish, right? That's what they were taught. And sometimes there's a bit of a confusion with it. Now, some people, for sure, there's way too much self-care. It's all about them. But there's very few people that are like that. To be honest, I don't, there's very few industries that would allow people to be that way. For most people, actually, they don't spend enough time doing the things that literally fill their cup. You probably have heard the analogy of, when the oxygen mask falls down, you need to put it on your face first. I don't know about you. I really hate that analogy, because I think when the oxygen mask falls down, it means we're going to crash. Like, that's not a good sign. Like, I don't want to see the oxygen. Or now in a pandemic, like, if someone gets an oxygen mask, it's because we're on life support. Like, we are not in good. This is not what I want you to put on your oxygen mask. Like, I want us to maybe get, preventative before we're kind of in a place like that. So I kind of like the idea of filling your cup. That's very important to keep your cup full. And you can't spill from an empty cup. And if you're planning on pouring into the lives of others, you have to be very intentional to do the things that fill your cup. And that's about bringing people around you. It's about making sure that you have some of those components that are life-giving, rather than the things that suck the marrow out of you. You need to have givers as well as takers. And when you start to look at how you structure your life and the people that are around you, the people who are investing in you, the people you are investing in, it is never selfish to fill your cup so you can spill into the lives of others. Selfish people are people who sit on the couch and expect you to feed them. You know, selfish people are people who every conversation is about them and what they want to talk about, right? It's people who take are selfish. But if you're filling your cup so you can spill into the lives of others, that's the furthest thing from being selfish. That's actually making sure that you have a proper supply so you can do the things that you really committed to say that you could do. And so when we look at this, and by the way, we look at some industries and for whatever reason it's considered selfish, but in other industries it's not. Like some of you live in areas where perhaps people do fall trees for a living. Maybe they're lumberjacks, right? And I'm not. You can probably tell that I'm far from that. I have very soft hands. It doesn't sort of work out that way. But the reality is, my understanding is when people are falling trees, if they hit dirt and their saw is not sharp for whatever reason, they don't wait until 9 o'clock at night to sharpen their saw. They sharpen their saw then and there. They don't make bad cuts the rest of the day and say, oh, well, this just stinks. I'm going to have a dull saw all day. They stop. Sharpening their saw is part of the work. It is making sure their tools are in place to be able to do the things they need to do. And I think for all of us, we need to be a bit careful because one of the first things that goes when we're caring for others is that we don't continue to sharpen our saw. And when we don't sharpen our saw, we don't make good cuts. Our work becomes a lot more laborsome. When you think of the word resilience, what comes to mind? Who comes to mind? What picture comes to mind? What words come to mind? You know, do you think of a person in your life? Do you think of something in nature that has resilience? You know, and when I think of resilience, I think of a tree that is well rooted, that's in the elements, you know, and has a big canopy and it's just like in the elements and stuff and comes back to that same shape. And that is the same for us, that we are to be resilient, right? We need to put some of those strategies in place to be able to do that. Now, oftentimes I hear people say, well, this has a lot to do with work-life balance, right? Maybe you hear people talk about this. And even the term work-life balance is incorrect in my opinion from the beginning. Not that I'm very opinionated, because it actually should be the other way around. It should be life-work balance, not work-life balance. You had life before work, and you are supposed to have life after work, right? And your work is supposed to fit into your life. Your life is not to fit into your work. It's actually incorrect. Actually, sometimes people talk about it being a teeter-totter. It's nothing of the sort because your work is not as heavy as your life. Your life has so many different components to it. If it was sort of one of those, it would have to be like that 5-spoke sort of teeter-totter kind of seesaw look. It would have to be because it's much more complex than that. And so I think oftentimes in our life, we need to really look at, like when we look at people that are in a healthy place, if I do a graph for you, where this is your productivity and this is your stress in your life, there would be like this natural bell curve. And at the top, we call it eustress. That's what we call in psychology, where you have the right amount of stress to be able to do the maximum productivity. You're in your sweet spot. But here's the thing I want you to understand. When we are underwhelmed and when we are overwhelmed, we have the same amount of productivity. It looks the same in terms of productivity, but how we would get back to eustress is completely different. And when people are overwhelmed, if they use the same strategies, they will actually push themselves further down that continuum, right? When we think of burnout, burnout is exclusive for people who genuinely care. Like people who don't care, they have a wealth of problems, but burnout won't be one of them. I can guarantee that. Burnout is exclusively for people who genuinely care. They're the most engaged person. They're the person who maybe even cares too much. And if we put more stress in their life, it only pushes them further down that continuum to disorder and perhaps even disease in their life. So let's talk about maybe what we can do. How can we maybe put in some of those resilient strategies? And I just want to throw 2 or 3 at them that will be very helpful for you that are being used consistently. One is we're finding that people who are most productive during this time, people who are most resilient, take breaks. They actually stop. Like people who actually eat lunch, like maybe even eat something they like, maybe something they prepared, you know, they actually do more in a day than people who don't. So if you wanted to increase your productivity, you would actually take more breaks. That's what the stats are telling us. The stats are telling us that people who walk for 30 minutes, even if it's 10 minutes, 30 minutes a day, exponentially have more resilience than people who don't. So like just simple things that we once did in our life that somehow get pressured out. I don't know about you, but sometimes we just have to stop and actually do a deep breath you know, like bring the air in and actually sort of fill the lower part of our lungs and actually slow ourselves down a bit. You know, this isn't profound, but it actually changes things. It actually changes our creativity. You know, with our kids, we say, you need a timeout. And why do we do that? Because we want you to feel and not just act. We want you to think before you act. So why as an adult, we don't give ourselves timeouts? I don't know. You know, and just take a break and start to think through. I want you to feel your feelings. I mean, I'm a therapist. That's what I want you to do. But I don't want you to act out on your feelings, because often when we act out, it becomes quite detrimental to us. You know, sometimes all we need is just a bit of perspective. Even though we can't change our current reality, we can change the way we look at our current reality. And in that perspective, our reality looks different. We also find that people who practice gratitude, the attitude of gratitude, seem to be able to manage these things in a different way. Now, I'm going to give you a different spin on how to use gratitude, because you've probably heard people, you know, that say, well, we need to find things that we're thankful for, and that is true. I'll tell you one way I use gratitude, and I don't mean it in a sarcastic way at all, so I don't want you to take me the wrong way on this. But sometimes when I meet someone who's incredibly prickly, like they're kind of like hugging a cactus, you know, they're just a little bit difficult to kind of, ooh, you know, and something's going on. And sometimes when they impact me in a very negative way, sometimes I try to think, well, Phil, be curious about yourself. What's going on with you? Why is this all going on? But oftentimes I'll go to a gratitude list, and I do it in a way that it actually brings compassion, and hopefully it might work for you as well. And I literally say to myself, I'm so grateful you're not my partner. I'm so grateful I don't have to have dinner with you. I'm so grateful you're not my dad. You know, I'm so grateful our time is just 3 minutes, and we don't have to be longer than that. And sometimes what it really does is it brings me to a place to think, wow, what is going on inside of this person? Because if they impact me this way, they must be impacting others in a similar way. And I don't need to make it all about me. Maybe we can just make it about the moment that perhaps that we're in. You know, one thing that, and I'll pass it back to you, Dianne, right after this, one thing that I use as a bit of a resilient strategy when I meet with someone that has been very difficult, and for me to spiritually allow myself to distance myself so I don't become entangled in their story. I allow their story to be their story, my story to be my story, and God to have his story that supersedes for all of us, is I use what I call a cleansing prayer. And I was given this by a Métis pastor actually in Winnipeg. And he was just so spiritually wise in ways that I was not. And when he did some of the spiritual care, he gave me this cleansing prayer. And literally I walked through it as a way of entrusting this person back into the care of God, and that the Holy Spirit would just cut these ties that have bound me to this individual in unhealthy ways, and really just allowing, you know, myself to distance myself. And sometimes I have to be honest with you, I wish I could just pray it once and I'd be good. With some people in my life, I need to pray this kind of regularly, you know, that I don't become too enmeshed and entangled in their story, and allow God to be God in their life, and allow me to do the things that I am called to do. So Dianne, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks, Phil. I just want to expand a wee bit on self-care, because sometimes we think self-care is, like you said, taking a break. But I think sometimes self-care is going to a chiropractor, making that doctor's appointment, going for a massage, having dinner with your partner, putting your phone in another room completely for an hour, just so that you're present with whatever it is you're doing. It might be turning away from the computer when somebody wants to talk to you, to be completely present with them. That is self-care, because we get so busy and caught up in things that we cause more anxiousness in ourselves. And so I think self-care is that mental health check on ourselves. And again, what do I need? So maybe calling a friend is great for that extrovert. And maybe you're thinking, no, for self-care, I just need to book half an hour and go sit in the woods somewhere and read a book or journal. And so there's lots of different things. And I just want to encourage you to dream a little bit about what you would do if you had an extra half hour, and a half hour when nobody wants anything from you. What would you do? And that may be your self-care for the day. So I just want to encourage you that way. So we're going to go into the breakout rooms here for, I'm not sure exactly how much time you're going to have, maybe 15 to 18 minutes. But the questions again will be in the chat room. Have you applied any of these things in the season? Maybe share something that you're doing that maybe somebody hasn't thought about. Which one do you want to work on or add to your life and community, or what barriers keep you from caring for yourself in these ways? So I think the barriers one is often the one that we skip, but I want, even if it's something you take home and ask yourself later, if you don't get to it in group, what are the barriers that keep you from that? Because often it may be a people pleasing thing, or you just are on and you don't know how to switch off. So that's what I'll just leave you with.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about being self-aware and a little bit of self-care, and now we're going to spend a few minutes just walking through maybe how to maybe hold on to your faith, but where does this all maybe come back together as we sort of pull that together. Now, an interesting thing that we say in Celebrate Recovery, and perhaps it's true for all of us, that you would never want to waste a hurt in your life. You paid too much for it, right? We don't want to squander something that's cost us so much. We want to learn from that. We want it to be significant in our life, and perhaps even a touch point where we can connect with others. And one of the things that can be very true is that as we're investing in others and perhaps spilling into other people's lives, one of the best ways that we can do that, and certainly with a generation that is coming up, they identify even more compared to my generation with when they can see something in your story, when you're willing to be vulnerable in your story in an appropriate way. And it's not about confessing all your mistakes and what you've done wrong, or, that it should be no mystery, that you have struggles. I mean, in our Celebrate Recovery program, when we were running it, the only dangerous person in our program is the person who has no problems. They would be like, "Ooh, that person, I don't know if we can trust that person, because anyone who doesn't have any problems just doesn't qualify to be part of our program." Perhaps we could maybe find out maybe that is the problem, is that they have no problems. And perhaps we need to work with that. But I really want to encourage you that your story is part of what will really connect with others. And when that's shared in an appropriate way, it can be incredibly helpful. And so I just want to give a couple ideas of how we can do that, and certainly to work through that. One of the things that's beautiful in God's kingdom is the things that actually we believe that disqualify us actually qualify us in his kingdom. The very things that we thought would maybe keep us from ministry or being of value in other people's lives. Like sometimes we forget, like Satan is a deceiver, right? He doesn't create. He takes something that's created and then he deceives it, right? God is the creator. And so sometimes what happens is, I think Satan can really play with us a little bit with this, that see, you've done something wrong. See, and when God redeems that very thing, the rubble in our life is exactly what he uses to build the wall. It's exactly those areas. Sometimes in our Celebrate Recovery program, I'd have people walk in, they say, "Phil, you're a therapist. I can't wait to talk to you about all these things." And I'd say, "Hey, listen, I'm happy to give you some of those ideas, but you want to talk to Peter, because Peter is amazing and he's walked through these things in his life, and he can say things and speak into your life in ways that I cannot. He is well placed because he has this redeemed in his life." And sometimes we miss out on presenting this story in a healthy way when we are sharing with others. I'm not saying we need to preach about this, but I do think it is one of those connecting points when we do empathize with others in our life. One thing I learned from my granddad, who lived to be just under 104, and just a great man, just an amazing man, orphaned at 15. I don't know if he had a grade 6 education, to be honest. And one of the things I remember saying to my boys when they got to know their great granddad, I said, we want to emulate him. There's no greater compliment that we can pay to him than to try to be like him, to try to really have areas of our life that would reflect those qualities that we find most enduring about him. And I said, one thing that you will always find about my granddad is he was curious. He was interested. And by the way, people who are interested are interesting. Have you noticed that? And people who are not interested, I think Simon Cowell uses the word, they become quite boring, right? Like there's not much to them. And I think if there was one thing that I would encourage you is, let's not get lost on all the rights or wrongs, or we should have or we shouldn't, or can you become curious with yourself? Why is this bothering me so much? Why is this person under my skin? Why is this person taking up so much mental real estate in my life? Why am I listening to voices that are relatively unimportant in my life and silencing the voices that are most important in my life? Like, be curious with you, but be curious with others. You know, the very thing that disqualifies people qualifies them. So how can we become interested? Because when we become interested, we become very interesting. And maybe when we see that sometimes we have people in our lives that are early adapters, sometimes the person that's giving us the greatest pushback is actually seeing something that we are not seeing. And they're just a bit ahead of us. They're seeing things and perhaps cutting away for us. Maybe not the way we would like, but maybe it is part of a warning sign. Maybe it'll save us from some grief later on in our life. And I guess I also want you to understand that more and more when we can learn from leading from our surplus, what we're actually good at, rather than trying to worry about our deficiencies, then we actually find that God can really bless that in our life. Now, I think you should be the first person to admit, like sometimes people say, well, Phil, you're not good at this. And I think you are kind. I stink at this. Like I am not good. Like that, I'm very not good at that. Like, I mean, it is not my strength. That is not my wheelhouse. But the things that I am good at, I need to be doing time and time again. I need to be investing. I don't need to question those things. And that is part of what I do bring to the table. And so when I start to live in that surplus, then I find that I am more gracious, that I do feel like I have something to offer, then I do become more curious with people around me. And here's one way that you can do this in your life. And I just want to give you a word picture on how you might be able to do this, because I can't change the grief that you may have. I can't change that we're in a pandemic. I can't change that perhaps some people are for or against, or maybe like or don't like, or all these other things that are going on in your life. But we can change our perspective. And we can focus on the things that perhaps we do get a say in. I don't know if you knew this. You only get a say in three things: in your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. Those are the three things you get to choose, right? It's kind of inappropriate to control other people's thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Like if you want to be in therapy the rest of your life, make sure that you're trying to control other people's thoughts, feelings, and behavior, right? Like they'll be kind of like, I don't know, you should be telling me what I think. I'm not sure that's really appropriate, or that you should be telling me how I feel. So when we do get back to what we can control, then I really want to encourage you to kind of picture your life like a wheel. And you're in the middle of this. If your life is like a bicycle wheel and you're the hub of that wheel, then I want you to just be very intentional to make sure that you're putting in spokes in your wheel that will support you. You know, and sometimes as a therapist, I have someone who comes to me and they say, Phil, I'm good. I have medication and I have you. And I think, oh my goodness, we have a two-spoked wheel. Like, I don't know about you, two-spoked wheels don't roll. Like this is not going to work out so well. Like this is not a good plan. And I want you just to continue to be very intentional, to be putting those spokes in the wheel that will allow you to move through this. Now we're in a pandemic. Your wheel's in mud. You know, you have aging parents, or perhaps, you know, congregations that aren't getting along, or children that aren't adjusting, and there's weight on the wheel. So even more then, you should be more intentional on putting those spokes in your wheel. You should be unapologetic about making sure that we have the spokes in the wheel. And by the way, not one person is supposed to play all the spokes in the wheel. That would be inappropriate to ask of anyone in our life. So I do think that this is part of where we can maybe move through, even through these difficult times, and perhaps we can see ourselves through this time. Dianne, let me pass it back to you.
That's great, Phil. And you know what? I don't even have anything to add, because I think the most value will be in your breakout room. So these are the questions that you would ask in this final breakout: is what stood out to you from just what Phil just had to say? What is one change that you're willing to make, and who can you share this with for accountability? And then if you feel led, just to pray for one another about the things that you've heard in your breakout rooms, so that we can all come back to finish up here. But that's all I got.
Well, welcome back. I trust that God has given you each a moment to take away and to act on as you've been here today. I trust that He's spoken to you, and I just encourage you to take that which He's spoken to you and apply faith and walk it out, and create accountability around that action step that you know that you're meant to take. I thank you so much Phil and Dianne for all the time and energy you've put into investing into us today from your expertise and your experience. We're just so grateful. Feel free to fill the chat with all kinds of thanks right now, guys, for those guys. If you want to get a hold of Phil or Dianne, they're both on our Enrich Resource Center. So you can just go to emcc.ca, emccenrich.ca if Katie wants to put that in the chat. Both of them have contact forms there. And so you can contact them directly through their contact forms. You can also see what kinds of services they provide, workshops that they could do, or personal helps that they can give as well. So thank you guys so much for all that you've invested here. Dianne moved yesterday and was still here on the call with us. So that was a sacrifice. We all know how stressful moving is. So bless you with rest, sister. And thank you, Katie, so much for taking care of the technology here today. Really appreciate that everything went smoothly, and we know that's just a blessing from you. Our next EMCC connected event, which is what we're on right now, it's just a Zoom platform for us to connect as a family and have learning and dialogue together like this. I hope you've found this valuable. Feel free to shoot me an email with any advice that you might have for us moving forward on topics, or how this could run better, more effectively in your opinion. And I'm always open to that kind of feedback. But our next one is on November 9th, and it is our SALT committee that's going to be bringing a conversation on sanctity of life. And so if you're interested in learning more and dialoguing about sanctity of life, we have some kind of experts in the room that are going to walk us through some thoughts, biblical theology on that. Now we're 1 minute over. I apologize. I'm just gonna bless you and with numbers 6, 24 and 26. You guys all know this one, but I just love it. So I bless you in the, may the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give each and every one of you peace as you minister and as you apply what you've learned today, in Jesus' name. Thank you all so much for being here today. And thanks for filling the chat with thanks for our facilitators. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, friends.